So you may have come across some of their work. They used to be a BBC producer, and when they were a BBC producer, they won the 2013 Scoop of the Year award for a program that was never actually broadcast, but did cover the Jimmy Savile revelations. And so that had one or two knock-on effects. They are now the investigations editor at the Bureau of Investigative, because they've doubled down on investigation here, at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and so they will be talking to us about how to make $100 million with a bogus bomb detector. Can you please put your hands together for Meirion Jones?
Hi there. Can you put your hands up if you've seen this talk before? You sad bastards. Right, you can help me though. In a moment, I'm going to hold this very important briefcase up, and I want you to go, whoa, when I finish what I'm saying. And I think the people who've done this before, they're the people best placed to help with this. And then when I say the second thing, when I hold it up again, I want you to go, ah, okay? So the first time I do it, you're going to go, whoa. No, not now, when I do it for real. And then the second time, you're going to go... Okay, all right, okay, so here we go then. This is the briefcase of doom. The contents of this briefcase have killed more people than every serial killer in British history. Yeah, I think it might have been better without that. So, let's see what's in the case. What we have here is the bargain basement bomb detector, which costs $10,000, and the new improved bomb detector, which costs $40,000. Now, yes, $85 million worth of them were bought by the Iraqi government. So, originally, this was sold as a golf ball detector. It was every bit as good at detecting golf balls as it was as detecting bombs. So what I thought I'd do is, under these extremely expensive props here, one of them has a golf ball under it, and I need a volunteer to use out the bomb detector to try and find the golf ball. Volunteer? Yeah, go on then. Now, Mark, do you want the cheapo $10,000 detector?
No.
I'm very resentful about this. I don't like other people touching it. Now, what you have to do is, I'll show you, you have to walk up and down with this, and you hold it as straight as you can, but it might start to deviate. And if it deviates towards one of those cups, we want you to pick up the cup. I should say, when I did this in Eastbourne, they had proper china cups. So we want you to stand there, don't go off the back of the stage, we haven't got any insurance, and just start walking up and down and seeing if you're detecting anything there. No, not me. Oh, stop. We're getting a signal there. No, let's go with the original signal. Do you want to pick up that prop? So, as you can see, they work very well. So what I thought I'd start by doing is playing you the start of the first film we made about these at Newsnight.
Am I done that?
Well, yeah, for the much use you were, yeah. And here goes.
The advert is dramatic. The claims it makes, even more so. The ADE 651 has a wand meant to point out explosives with the help of a special programmed card. and all powered by no more than the operator's static electricity. So-called bomb detectors similar to this one are being sold around the world, and Iraq has bought thousands of the ADE 651, but experts say they simply do not work. The Iraqi government has spent millions of pounds on them. At what price then for the Iraqi people? Three times in the past few months, Baghdad has been hit by coordinated waves of bombings. This was last October. In December, over 120 people were killed. And Iraqis have been asking how so many bombs could have passed through the city's security to devastating effect. Well, the ADE 651 is in use at most checkpoints in Baghdad, each one costing around $40,000. In all, the Iraqi government has spent $85 million on them. Okay, let's carry on. I'll just get these health and safety hazards out of the way. So, what happened was this. The woman you saw on screen there was Caroline Hawley, who was the BBC's main correspondent in Baghdad throughout the last years of Saddam Hussein's time there and the first years of the Allied invasion. And she was thrown out by Saddam Hussein and nearly thrown out by the Americans. She was a good, honest journalist who really cared about the people of Iraq. And in November 2009, Caroline, by then, was back at the BBC in London, and she came to see me, and she said, "Have you seen Rod Nordland's article in the New York Times?" And I had. And what had happened was this. Rod Nordland had written a piece saying that these bomb detectors in Baghdad, the Americans were worried about them, the British wouldn't do anything about it, even though they were British-made, and that there was a cause for concern here. Now, my initial thought was that Britain would do something about this very quickly. By the time we could get together to do anything serious about this, something would have been done. Either the British or the Iraqis would do something about it. It was fairly obvious to me very quickly that these were similar to the devices that have been exposed partly by James Randi and others in the 1990s in America. And we started work on it, but not really expecting that we'd have to do a proper investigation. So what happened next was, sorry, you'll find my presentation is not as seamless as some other people's are. But what happened next was that there was a press conference in Baghdad because there was another huge spate of bombings, 100 people died, and Jim McCormick, whose product these were, went to Baghdad to do a press conference. That's Jim McCormick in the middle.
Mr. Jim هو صاحب الشركة ATSC.
Jim McCormick may be hiding from the cameras here in the UK, but he did appear at a press conference in Baghdad after last month's bombs, filmed by Iraqi television. He and this Iraqi security chief were trying to persuade local journalists that the detectors worked. The grenade the device is meant to detect is placed in full view of the operator. No surprise, it points at its target. It would be comic if the consequences weren't potentially so tragic.
Okay, and we'll just get rid of that. So, what we've now got is a press conference in Baghdad with the head of the Baghdad bomb squad and Jim McCormick, both of them endorsing this bomb detector. What does that tell you about the head of the Baghdad bomb squad? Anybody? Huh? Yeah, whoever said it, he's been bribed. If you're the head of the Baghdad bomb squad, you know about bombs and you know this doesn't work. So this immediately made us very concerned because it was plain that we wouldn't get any action by the Iraqi authorities. We started talking to British authorities, the MOD, the Foreign Office, BIS, and they were all reluctant to do anything, and we didn't understand why at the time, but we found out later. So we then went flat out to try and find a way that we could obtain one of these, test it, show it didn't work. Plainly, Jim McCormick didn't want us to get hold of one of these. At one point, we did some work with Professor Bruce Hood, who was also very involved in this. I'm sure many of you know him. And it looked like he might let Bruce Hood go and visit him and demonstrate the device. And we were going to go along undercover as Bruce Hood's assistants, secretly film, and then spring out at some point during the filming. Needless to say, McCormick never kept the appointment. It never happened. But what did happen was that a local journalist caught him out, happened to visit at the exact moment that he was visiting his factory. It was more of a workshop, really. And this happened. Now, there's something very strange about this interview. Normally, when you interview local businessmen, they are desperate to have their face on camera. McCormick only agreed to the interview if it was filmed with his face not on camera.
But he did agree to talk to local BBC correspondent Clinton Rogers, but only on condition his face was not shown. And he made some extraordinary claims for his device.
In ideal conditions, you can be up to 1 kilometre away.
A kilometre?
A kilometre.
Right, so this card will help this device spot explosives a kilometre away.
Under ideal conditions, correct.
Okay, so he is now making very specific claims for how his device works and what it does. He is claiming that these cards, which go inside the device, essentially the expensive version had a wire attached to a supposed card reader. These cards are programmed for different things. This says ETN, so this was programmed for TNT. Others were programmed for a vast range of other substances. And he's claiming that what is on this card is the key to the detection. So we're still reaching out, trying to look for whistleblowers at this time. And it's really difficult because whistleblowers are reaching out to you, but they don't know that you are the person they should go to, and you're reaching out to them. You're like two blindfolded people reaching out to each other, and neither of you make in touch. But eventually, one of the men who made the cards for the device had seen stuff on the internet, skeptical sites, and became worried about what his company was doing. He didn't want his boss to find out that he was talking to us, and he came and met us at a London railway terminus, which is sort of what tends to happen with these things, and handed over a load of the cards that were programmed. Now, if you looked, I don't think these lights are bright enough, but if you looked with a very bright light through these, they appear to have an electronic circuit inside them. So we thought if we test what's on the circuit, and our belief was that it would turn out to be rubbish. It would be, something like Space Invaders code or whatever. There would be something on there, but it would be something completely worthless. That if we could test that and show it was nothing to do with explosives detectors, something would have to be done. So this is what happened next.
Jim McCormick claims that the cards that go into the card reader are the key to how the device works, and that different cards can detect anything from explosives to dollar bills and even elephants.
This is tuned to a channel. This is tuned to a frequency, and when that's inserted into the card reader is now looking for that frequency band.
We managed to obtain a set of Mr. McCormick's special cards.
The secret of the device is supposedly these cards, which are somehow programmed to detect the explosives you're looking for. This one says in Arabic, TNT. Remember that Jim McCormick says this is the key to the detector. So we wanted to find out if there's anything inside the card that could allow it to identify TNT. We've come to the Cambridge Computer Laboratory to find out.
Dr. Marcus Kuhn is going to analyse it for us.
Okay, so this looks like a plastic card which may have some electronics inside, and what we're going to do is to take apart the card, delaminate it, cut through it, and see what's inside.
It's a delicate process, every stage painstakingly done. Dr. Kuhn's trying to extract the circuit inside. Finally, he has it.
There's nothing to program in these cards. There is no memory, there is no microcontroller, there is no way any form of software or other information can be stored.
Impossible.
Completely impossible. These are shop theft prevention cards. These are the cheapest bit of electronics that you can get that look vaguely electronic and are sufficiently flat to fit inside a card. This is just plastic and aluminium.
It couldn't be programmed then to detect TNT?
Absolutely not.
We bought this in Curry's. It has a security label on the back. Is that all you're saying this is then?
As you can see, it's pretty much the same construction. Both of these devices are designed to be easily detectable at the shop door if you decide to run away with it without paying.
Okay. So, we were now in a position where we had firm evidence that the claims that were being made were false. Now, you might say to me, you could have done that test yourself. You could have opened up one of the cards. Well, a couple of things there. One is we didn't have that many cards, and we didn't dare risk wasting them. But more importantly, it's much better if a test like that is done by somebody like the Cambridge Computer Laboratory and you have a definitive voice giving you that information. People are going to listen to that far more. And also it gives you a sequence that you can film, if I'm honest. But what was going on here was that I was in contact with the Foreign Office, Ministry of Defence, Department of Business, and saying to them, we've just done these tests. It was a Monday we got the results. We are broadcasting on Friday. And when we broadcast on Friday, if you haven't done anything about this, it's the run-in to the 2010 election. We will let any opposition people who want to come on and say, you're exposing British and American troops to danger, you're exposing Iraqi civilians to danger, and it's going to look very bad for you. It's not actually apparently how you're supposed to work in the BBC. You're not actually supposed to blackmail departments and so on. But I did check very carefully, and in the enormous guidelines for producers, there's nothing which specifically outlaws blackmail. So we kept talking to them right through the week, and they started getting more and more nervous. And it's the usual, MOD says it's Biz says it's somebody else says it's FCO. It's going round and round in circles. And we get to the Friday, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to put up the online article at 2 in the afternoon, so it starts getting a bit of coverage. We're going to do it on the 6 o'clock news, and then we'll do a big thing on Newsnight at 10:30. So, the departments are still saying there's nothing they can do. 2 o'clock, we put it up online, and it starts getting traction, partly from people like you, partly in foreign countries by people saying, what the hell's going on here? And then at 5:45, before the 6 o'clock news, we suddenly get a phone call that says, Peter Mandelson is outlawing the export of these bogus devices, which you have proved are bogus, to Iraq and Afghanistan because they would endanger British troops. That was good for us, because our headline, instead of being, we've shown that these things are bogus, is government bans export of these bogus devices, on the basis of our tests. But that proved to be only the start of a very long process. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass these around. Please be very careful about them. These are very valuable objects. But more importantly, there is no way that I can ever get any more. They've either been pulped or they're in the hands of people who are not going to hand them over. Now, I'm trying to see. These look like the cheap seats to me. So on this side, you get the $40,000 one. And on this side, you get the measly $10,000 one. And if you just pass it along, and when they get to the back, if somebody can come and bring them to me. I've also got a couple of detection cards here. This is what they look like, and this is one that's been opened up to reveal the anti-theft tag. Whoop. Actually, they got shortchanged on that, so swap over. And what I'd like to do now, before I go any further, is maybe see if we've got some questions and so on, and whether we can get the microphone up. We'll have more questions later on in this, and it may be that I say we're going to get to that. But let's get you involved a little bit. If you have got questions, come up and throw us some questions. If you've got big, deep questions, I should say wait to the end, but I actually say no, wait till after the end. But anyone's got any questions at the moment? Oh, starting to get some movement.
I didn't actually catch the name of the man that was making these, but how did he get into this in the first place?
That's a good question. His name is Jim McCormick. He's serving 10 years at the moment. We'll get to that in due course. His background was this. He sold Pi radios in Africa and bribed people to buy them. So he sold not very good radios in a corrupt way. For him, it was only one step to sell something that didn't work at all in a corrupt way. So on that contract for 85 million, the total cost of all the kit, flying around the world, etc., was probably about $1 million. So 84 million, I mean, this makes drug dealers look like amateurs, is profit. And he took half of that profit, and we'll see what happened to the rest of the profit a bit later. Go on.
How did you get hold of the detectors? Did you have to pay full price for them?
Yes, and the BBC happily signed off the expenses. No, what happened was when we made our first film, we didn't have the detectors. All we had was the cards and what he said about the cards, but that was enough. Because he was making a specific claim about what the card did, we could prove that the detector was false. Later on, in various ways, we acquired the real, if you like, detectors. Yes?
You mentioned a similar device had been uncovered some years earlier in the US. What was the connection between the two, if any?
Shall I get to that later, or shall I tell you now?
You might say that.
I'll get to that later. That's the next place I'll go. Well, next but one or two-ish. Yes?
Hi, I've got quite a large extended family in Baghdad and Iraq. I'm Iraqi myself. So I've got a certain poignancy, I guess, to this question.
Yeah.
Do you know how many people in total have died as a result of this device?
The Iraqis estimate many hundreds. My estimate is about 2,000 people died because of this device. It was the ring of steel around Baghdad. It was the main defense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, in some ways we laugh at some of this, but the experience of people in Iraq was absolutely catastrophic as a result of this.
So, as a physicist, I'm looking at this and I'm hearing the claim about the static electricity charge, quite apart from anything else, and I'm thinking, how did nobody even ask the very simple schoolboy questions about it? And slightly linked, I don't know if anyone here has ever read any of Tom Clancy's books, but his book, I think it was Rainbow Six, featured this kind of lunacy in it. Yep. And I kind of read this book and thought, what on earth is he on? So I'll perhaps leave that to you to answer in your presentation as it goes. But
well, the Clancy book actually referred to another of these devices which was sold as a real device and which he presumably was fooled by, which was every bit as phony as the... Actually, I shouldn't say that. I should leave you to make up your own minds about whether they're phony or not. The other point you made about the evidence, and this is skipping ahead a bit, but given that I've told you that Jim McCormick is in prison, I can probably break the news that he was put on trial here, that at his trial, they got hold of a Romanian professor to come and make a gobbledygook explanation of how this worked in pseudo-scientific language. They even, I presume, paid a journal to publish a paper by this professor to appear to back up the position. He didn't appear in person. He appeared down a telelink from Romania. But yeah, no, they tried to put in a physical explanation for how it worked.
Was there no need to demonstrate in any way that it worked before you got a license to export this, either from Britain or into Iraq?
No, that was a brilliant catch-22. If it had been a real bomb detector, it would have needed a license to export it. Because it wasn't a real bomb detector, it did not need a license to export it.
I'm curious as to how he got the credibility to walk up to people in the first place? Was he, you know, disguising his stuff in a bunch of legitimate products and he just went along and they assumed because it's with those, it's also valid? Or did he just walk up with this and nothing else and people said, okay?
There was a huge market, corrupt business going on in Iraq on everything from army uniforms, every form of procurement, rubbish kit, usually kit that worked. You know, like a uniform is a uniform, you can wear it. But very third-rate uniforms being sold as if they were absolutely state-of-the-art. So there was a general industry like that there. And so he then approached a middleman, a Beirut general who was very powerful, who then knew who the people were that you needed to go to at the other end.
I think one of the real stories is the bit about the reluctance on the part of the UK government to do anything about it. So I'm just speculating here, but like, does he have a lot of powerful backers in the government, or like, how does he get away with something like this? And isn't the real story of how this doesn't get investigated and he gets a pass, that should be the real story, no?
We'll get there, and if I forget, somebody remind me, because it is an important part of the story. I don't want to jump ahead that far. Okay, a story like this. Is it a story where you can use humour, do you think? There's a brilliant guy called Sidney Alford. He's classic old British eccentric. I mean, we always used him when we wanted to blow up planes. He's an explosives expert, spends all his time blowing things up, but he's a member of C&D. He has a quarry where he's licensed to do anything he wants to do. And when, say, the BBC or CNN, whenever there was one of those bomb plots to blow up an airliner, and there was some exotic mixture being suggested that they were making the bombs out of, you'd go to him, you'd buy a chunk of old airliner, stick it in his quarry, he would mix the stuff up with whichever compounds they were supposed to be made out of, and he would then blow up the section of airliner and he would film it. And his bombs always went off. Quite often the bomb makers' bombs didn't go off, but his always did. And he had this sort of license to roam, partly because he did favours for people. So, for instance, the SAS came to him and said, we have this problem when we're doing a hostage rescue. We always have to go in through the doors or the windows. Do you have any other ideas? And he came up with this sort of plastic shield like this, with explosives cord around the edge that you filled up with water to damp it, and then you propped it against a wall, and it would just blast a hole straight through a double wall of bricks. But his main business was making bomb detectors and making bomb disposal apparatus. And that's what he was doing. But he cared passionately about this, and he managed to get hold of one of the other devices for us, a device called the GT200. So I'm just going to play you a little clip of this. Here we go. I've got my wrong glasses on. That's never going to help. So here we go then. This is Sidney Alford.
We turn to Sidney Alford, who reconstructs terrorist attacks and who gives advice to military agencies. He's one of the country's leading experts on explosives, and he's acquired a dowsing-type device to show us.
So let's take it apart and see what's inside it.
Okay.
Difficult to open.
Not intended to be opened, I suspect.
So there's nothing in there that could detect a bomb that could possibly work.
Speaking as a professional, I would say that was an empty plastic case.
Okay. Yeah, the great Sidney Alford. So let's get back then. Somebody was asking, where does this come from? And obviously, in a way, it goes into the whole dowsing tradition and so on. But in the 1990s, early 1990s, a man called Malcolm Rowe, who sadly was from Wales, and an American with an extremely strange name, got together and called a device after the two of them, and it was called the Quad Row Tracker. And they sold it as a golf ball detection device, and it sold very cheaply, $15, $20. I was distracted for a moment by that lunatic gesticulating over there. But they sold them for about $20, and then they got a bit more ambitious. They started selling them to schools as knife detectors on the way into school, and then as gun detectors. And then they started selling them to American police departments, who bought these things for $1,000. Now, fortunately, one American policeman in Texas immediately smelt a rat. He went down to the courtroom where they had an X-ray scanner on the way in, put it through the X-ray scanner, and said these are a hoax. So what then happened was they were tested at the Quantico FBI labs, at the Sandia labs, at various places. James Randi started kicking off about them, and warnings were put out across the states that these were fraudulent. Attempts were made to take them to court, which didn't exactly work. But in effect, what happened was the American business was closed down. And Malcolm Rowe fled to Britain, where he got involved with a guy called Samuel Tree, and they started fiddling around with this in the late 90s in Britain. And then what happened was 9/11. Suddenly, everyone needed bomb detection equipment. There was a huge market for it, vast amounts of money, and no devices available in the quantities that were needed. So they jumped in. They even tried to sell these things to Heathrow Airport, other airports around the world. They were tested by the government here, found to be complete nonsense. There's a thing called the Blue Book that they put out to government departments and to embassies and the MOD, listing kit that works and putting out warnings about stuff that doesn't, and there were warnings about this. But at the same time, one of the guys who made these, a guy, Gary Bolton, who made the device that you just saw in the clip with Sidney Alford, he went to the House of Commons Select Committee on Trade and Industry with a defence manufacturer's delegation, and he gave witness that he had this brilliant new device that wasn't getting enough support. So civil servants then gave government support to one of these bogus bomb detectors. Jim McCormick also got some help from Biz. The most astonishing thing was the Royal Engineers. And they have a department called the Royal Engineers Export Support Department. And if you pay them money, and it's all part of selling British defence around the world, they will turn up at trade fairs in full uniform and demonstrate your kit and give the impression to foreign countries that this is legitimate kit. And that's what they did. They went around the world flogging these devices. The Foreign Office was also helping. So the Foreign Office, embassies around the world were helping them flog these things. So at the same time that I was on Newsnight with Jeremy Paxman and we were exposing these devices, Jeremy's brother Giles was the ambassador in Mexico. And he was holding receptions for these people, helping flog these devices to the Mexican government. So this is why the Foreign Office and the MOD and Biz didn't want to get involved in any of this stuff. They just wanted it to go away. They weren't keen. I know police officers who tried to do something about it and were steered away from doing anything. Although eventually Avon and Somerset police waded in on it, and after we showed our first programme, City of London police came in because they deal with the big international frauds. So that's why there was this reluctance from the British government to do anything about it. They'd rather people carried on dying than actually be embarrassed and do anything until they were absolutely put on the spot. So let me go somewhere else now with this. What happens, I was saying it's very difficult to find the whistleblowers in the first place. Once you put a program out there, once people know you're interested, they come to you. And we had an extremely good whistleblower came to us who was then able to uncover the whole inside story of Jim McCormick. At the time, he didn't want his name known, Those of you who saw me at Merseyside Skeptics, he came to Merseyside Skeptics and revealed himself as being Steve Streets, now that McCormick is in prison. I want to play you a little bit. The voice on it is not his voice, bizarrely it's my voice, but that's because we had to use a different voice. At the time he didn't want his identity known. But I'm just going to show you a little bit of the whistleblower, what he had to say about the operation.
So what kind of man would sell fake bomb detectors to a country where lives depended on it?
I'll just stop you. That's Jim McCormick in the field, actually selling these bomb detectors in Niger. And the man with the blurred head is our whistleblower, Steve Streets.
This is Jim McCormick on a sales trip to Niger, being filmed by a colleague who had believed that the devices worked. He's now agreed to talk exclusively to Newsnight, as long as we conceal his identity. Which countries did you go to with Jim McCormick to sell these devices?
We flew all around the world. Belgium, Romania, Hong Kong, Niger, Nigeria, Kenya. The training for the Iraqis was done in Turkey.
He started to have suspicions, and then senior army officers in Niger complained that the detectors didn't work. The whistleblower confronted McCormick. What happened when you raised your concerns with Jim McCormick?
Well, I said, if this really doesn't work, I can't be any part of it. He said it does exactly what it's designed to. I said, what's that? I was expecting him to say it detects explosives, ivory, gold. He never said that. He said, it makes money. I said, I want nothing more to do with it. He said, suit yourself, you're walking away from millions. I said, at least I can sleep at night, Jim.
The big contract was in Iraq, and the trick there was to find corrupt middlemen who had signed government contracts to buy the ADE 651s. People like the head of the Baghdad bomb squad.
The middlemen don't care if people live or die. They're only interested in one thing. How much am I going to get back? Cash back.
So no question in your mind at all that it was bribery that oiled the wheels of this scam?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, again, there was a mention of ivory there. You had elephants before, which caused a bit of a laugh. When we broadcast our first film, Stephen Fry got in touch and said, when I was in Kenya recently, the Kenya Wildlife Service were using these devices to try and find poached ivory, stockpiles of poached ivory. He said, I thought about telling them, but I thought, I just can't do that. I can't tell them. A lot of people got in touch with us like that, having seen these in various ways in different places. So we started following the money trail, looking at how bribes were paid. And we're going to play you a bit more of that when I get the bit. Here we are. And we'll pull it up to full size again.
There was something else that brought Jim McCormick to Beirut. The city, once the financial capital of the Middle East, is still a playground for the rich, a freewheeling place where money can be easily spent and laundered. It was, our source says, where McCormick came to pay his bribes to the Iraqis.
The whistleblower says he came here to a bank in Beirut and witnessed Jim McCormick organising the payoffs, that he watched as he arranged for bank accounts to be set up under false names.
3 Iraqis have so far been arrested for corruption over the deals, but the whistleblower says he saw a list of around 15 names.
Our source says the Iraqi officials were issued with bank cards which allowed them to take out large sums of money from cash machines anywhere in the world without being traced. He also says that electronic transfers were made to other accounts.
McCormick could afford to give bribes to the Iraqis.
Okay, I'm just going to pause it there for a second. So obviously they used various electronic ways of transferring money, and we're talking about millions of dollars to one person at a time sometimes. Like the head of the bomb squad probably got about $5 million, for standing up day after day with people being blown up around him, his countrymen, and just counting the money coming in. But the trouble with electronic means is that usually you can trace them. So the main way they were using there, I don't know if you understood what was said there, is they would set up an account with no link whatsoever to the person they were going to bribe. They'd put a load of money in it. They'd get a bank card, a cash card, and physically give that to the individual, and they could then draw out money anywhere in the world from any cash machine, and there was no trace back to them. There was a trace back to the account, but the account did not trace back to them. It's a very sort of crude way of doing it, but actually quite effective. So I'm about to play you a little bit here about how much money McCormick made out of it, and in it you will see reference to a house that he bought from Nicolas Cage. As we were making the film, we realized that Nicolas Cage had bought the house with the money he made from filming Lord of War.
He bought exclusive properties in Bath, including this one, sold to him by Hollywood film star Nicolas Cage, complete with Roman-style indoor swimming pool. His profits also funded a country home in Somerset, smart cars and dressage horses, as well as houses in Cyprus and Florida, and a yacht.
Actually, the yacht looks a bit feeble compared to the rest. We think, essentially, he probably got $42 million out of this trade, and the people he bribed got $42 million. Those assets, and an order has now been made for their recovery, will probably bring in maybe $20 million, maybe a bit more, something around about that. He still has money hidden in Beirut, Hong Kong, who knows where. And when he comes out, he will find a way of getting that money. They can only trace the assets that they can find. So he'll probably only serve 5 of the 10. He'll probably be out in 2018, 2019, depending how much time they think about in terms of what he served before he was actually convicted. So that's Jim McCormick. But I don't want you to have the impression that all the Iraqis were corrupt, because we met a very brave man called Mr. al-Turehi, who was doing the same as we were, but as a government official on the other side. He was in the Ministry of Interior, and he was trying to track down the people who were being paid the bribes, and he was trying to stop this.
We've discovered that the general had been bribed by Jim McCormick. He's now been jailed for corruption, thanks to the work of this man. He's the Inspector General of the Interior Ministry, Aqil al-Turehi. He says his investigation is backed by the Prime Minister, but that other high-ranking officials are implicated in the conspiracy.
I feel furious as a citizen of Iraq when I think that this gang of Jim McCormick and the Iraqis working with him killed my people in cold blood by creating a false sense of security with a useless device.
Yeah. He was rewarded for that by being made governor of the most dangerous place in Iraq. So he didn't really get his just desserts. As far as I know, he's still alive at the moment. Actually getting Jim McCormick to court took a very long time. We were extremely suspicious, and the police were extremely suspicious that they were being interfered with all the way along. We broadcast our program in 2010. It wasn't until 2013-14 that they were actually convicted, the last one in 2015. This is Jim McCormick outside the court. At least he had his day in court. So I'll play you a little bit of that.
People have died in Iraq. How many people's lives have been saved?
Today at the Old Bailey, Jim McCormick was convicted of fraud.
So he's saying how many people's lives were saved by his bomb detectors. I think we know the answer to that. It's been said to me that people like Jim McCormick, cops say to me, fraud cops, that they can almost create part of their brain where this is true. They know full well it's a fraud, but when they're arguing with people, when they're trying to sell these things, they can almost create a part of their brain in which it is true, and they live within that.
Soon as they move away from that, as we heard in the discussions with the whistleblower, he's saying, we do it to make money, etc. But, at times they can just make themselves appear. And when he and his colleagues came to court, fraud trials are two-stage processes. I sat through most of the court trials. In the first part of the trial, they swear blind that the device works, and they try and prove it works. And then about halfway through, they go, oh my God, the prosecution have shown it doesn't work. I was totally fooled. Because in fraud, you have to prove intent. And that is very difficult to do. And the defense try and create uncertainty in the mind of the jury. Do we know beyond reasonable doubt what was really going on in his head? Now, it didn't save McCormick, and the judge was excellent in that case. It didn't save the guy who made the devices that we saw Sidney Alford playing with, who is this man, Gary Bolton. Well, that's a bit small, never mind. But it did save this man, Simon Sherrard. So this guy was every bit as guilty as the others. At the end of his trial, the evidence was every bit as good as it was at the other trials. At the end of the trial, the jury found him not guilty. He was so astonished, he erupted out of the dock, hugging everyone, including me, because he could not believe that he'd been found not guilty. And he's still not guilty to this day, even though he sold quite a few of these devices. What am I going to go here? I should open it up for the last, because we're going to have to close in about 5 minutes. Maybe I should open it up to questions. Hopefully, there are a couple more things I need to say, but I can do that during questions. Can we return to questions at this point?
Hi. I held the deluxe device and examined it briefly and everything, and I think it's...
Oh yeah, where have they gone, by the way? How far back are they? Okay, well keep going with them.
And it's really overwhelmingly cheap and tacky and chintzy. And I'm just wondering, are there other people making more impressive fake bomb detectors? Because obviously, this is still, this is what governments all over the world want to do. Are you aware of this? Is this the only one that you know of, or is there an epidemic?
There's a whole industry. As to making them more impressive, towards the end, Jim McCormick was thinking of putting flashing lights on them.
Yeah, exactly.
And no, there are a whole load of similar devices still being made. Unival in Germany were making them until very recently. The German police moved in. I think they've stopped making them, but the German police don't seem to have proceeded with charges. None of them were quite as grievous as McCormick in Iraq, but there are quite a few. My estimate is in all, these people have sold about $200 million worth of these devices around the world, and they still keep coming up. Let me ask you a question. Who do you trust? Which newspaper would you trust more? Just shout yes if you do. Let's go. The Sun. The Telegraph. The Guardian. Right, okay. In 2014, I haven't got a very good picture of this, but I'll just pop it up anyhow. A device called the CFast HIV and hepatitis detector was launched in Egypt. The Guardian published, it's very small, but you'll see enough to see that it is a familiar shape. And it moved to indicate whether somebody had hepatitis or not. The Guardian wrote a completely uncritical write-up of that device as if it was a serious breakthrough in modern medicine, filed by their Cairo correspondent, put in the paper. Fortunately, a lot of people like you, probably including people in this room, quickly started commenting on the article, and it was completely rewritten with a new headline, going away from breakthrough medical science to severe doubts about this device.
It should have been a lot stronger than that. So that was The Guardian. A year ago, when the Russian airliner was blown up coming out of Sharm el-Sheikh, The Sun sent reporters to look at hotel security. This may or may not work. So, The Sun on their front page went with Sharm bomb detectors are fakes, exposed that the bomb detectors used at the hotels were this sort of kit again. So who should you trust on bogus bomb detectors? The Guardian or The Sun? Right, yeah, more questions.
Clearly there's been convictions, but since the Foreign Office and the Royal Engineers were complacent in this fraud, I would argue, unknowingly complacent, has there been any fallout for whoever were involved in these organisations?
No.
Should there be?
Initially, the government, the new Tory coalition government had come in, said they were going to do something about this, get a European-wide ban, all this sort of stuff. And then they wrote a letter, a minister called Mark Prisk at the time wrote a letter which essentially said, if we were to stop selling bogus bomb detectors, nobody else would, so we'd be carved out the bogus bomb detector market. It was written in code, you know, civil service code, but that's essentially what it was saying. Sorry.
So I'm aware this went across two governments. In your opinion, were they aware that these were bogus before you brought this to their attention?
And this is our last question.
Yes, definitely, because the Americans had raised it with them at the very least the previous summer. Our whistleblower had gone and worked with a sceptical campaigner, Richard Saunders, and they had written to the MOD, they'd written to all sorts of people, they'd gone to James Randi. There were plenty of opportunities for them to know, but they just didn't want to know. You know, they didn't want the embarrassment of having to deal with this. And it was very shameful, and it should have been much more of a scandal, that end of it. In fact, everyone focused on, in a way, the easy bit, what had happened in Baghdad, and the criminal, not enough focus on the civil servants behind it who let it happen, who ignored their own advice from the Blue Book, and then really interfered to try and slow down the police investigation. But yeah.
That's it for the time we have. Can we have a huge final round of applause for Meirion Jones?